Okay, well, I'm super glad that I'm at a Buddhist gathering and we've all just gathered so much peace and mindfulness as we wait. What a lovely place to have a little snafu or two. Well, so I'm Cara. I'm, yeah, really excited and happy that I get to talk tonight here. Like June said, and like I said a moment ago, yeah, I often facilitate Tuesday nights, and I've been an ongoing participant there. And Sundays, I also often practice with Dallas Movement Collective. So I'm just really grateful that you guys are having me here in this space. And I wanted to talk tonight a little bit about engaged Buddhism, meeting the moment with strength and compassion, just because this feels like it's a topic that has been coming up in my mind and in my world, and it feels very apt, especially in this space, because Thich Nhat Hanh has had such an influence on this community. Even the Tuesday night gathering, Wake Up Dallas, that Wake Up is a group that Thich Nhat Hanh created for 18 to 35-year-olds. So his influence has been huge on my practice. And yeah, I did want to take a moment at the start of this talk to share a little practice that I often engage in. Outside of being here, I also practice in a Tibetan Buddhist tradition. And one little practice of theirs that I really love is that at the start of any event or talk, we'll usually take a moment to, what it's called is giving rise to bodhicitta, or the awakened heart. And that's really just becoming aware of our most altruistic intention, or coming up to a talking, or coming to a practice session. So I want to invite us for just a moment to bring our awareness into our hearts and into our minds, and reflect for a short moment on the highest altruistic reason that we have for arriving here today. All right, beautiful. Thank you, guys. Yeah, so Thich Nhat Hanh, he coined the term engaged Buddhism, and I'm sure you're all familiar with it, but yeah, it's really just taking the framework and the ethical discipline within Buddhism and applying it to the way in which we emerge, work, exist in our external day, in our external lives. And I think when Buddhism first was imported into the West, it was often seen as kind of a cold and philosophical discipline, or at least that's how some people experienced it. And, really, I think Thich Nhat Hanh, through bringing this idea of engaged Buddhism to the forefront and to the West, really was able to deliver this core principle of wisdom and compassion, being these two sides of the coin of our practice that have to come together. We can't have one without the other. And yeah, I was reflecting on a story of Thai's that I had heard in like 1954, when a local newspaper asked him to write some articles on Buddhism. And this was kind of before a lot of his career, and obviously he's written so much poetry and made so much art, and his catalog is just superfluous. But yeah, he wrote some articles on Buddhism, and the newspaper sold very, very, very well, like exceedingly well. And I love how humble he is. He was like, it's not my writing that's the reason that this paper sold so well. It's because people were so thirsty for it. And I find that to be true today as well. I wanted to share this photo of Saturday. This was yesterday at the gathering for the monks that were walking for peace, and they came home to their temple in Fort Worth yesterday, and there was hundreds and hundreds of people that came out. And I had someone turn to me and say, like, I can't believe that on a Saturday morning at 8 a.m. when it's going to be raining, there's just like hundreds of people pouring out here. And it was just, it was such a beautiful and unique showing. And so, I think that in this time of turmoil, in this time of great unrest and great uncertainty, that there is a hunger that people are having for direction, for connection, and we see that really exemplified in moments like this. And I kind of wanted to reflect on, how we bring this motivation to action in our own practice and in our own lives. Because, yes, it's lovely that this happened and that we all came out for it. But I also realized that we can't wait for monks to walk across America for us to jump out and move. And so, how do we have our practice motivate us? Because I think that there is sometimes this inclination for our practice to make us apathetic as well. That happens, very easily. It can sneak up on me as well. I've been to Dharma teachings on the four immeasurables, on compassion and loving kindness, and a frequent question is just, that's great that we're like collecting all this compassion on our mats, but how does that like emerge in the world outside of us? And this kind of like two-sided coin of being on the mat and practicing, and then being in the world and moving that compassion into the world, it can be really hard to marry those. And sometimes those two aspects of us can become really disconnected. And so I'm about to play a clip of a conversation between Ezra Klein and Ta-Nehisi Coates, who writes on the Black experience in America. They talk a lot about activism and how to show up in the world. However, this conversation, to give context to it, originally started as a reaction to the death of Charlie Kirk, and Ezra Klein kind of, giving condolences to it, and Ta-Nehisi Coates not agreeing with that reaction. So that's the place that this conversation comes from. But I think their two positions really highlight this, Ezra Klein, kind of being someone who's a bit more on the mat, who's a meditator himself, and then Ta-Nehisi Coates really like exemplifying this role of activism in the world. And I do want to note, before we get into this discussion and this taking a look at this framework of engaged Buddhism that I'm gonna put forward, that engaged Buddhism, because it's taking Buddhist frameworks and Buddhist principles and applying them to activism, has inherently taken on a nonviolent approach. And Ta-Nehisi Coates takes on a nonviolent approach in his response as well. I just want to invite everyone to, in their hearts, if they feel any moments where they're critical of something or there's pushback, let that be there. Feel critical. Be questioning of everything that you hear. And I just want to give a nod to the many revolutionary voices who sometimes take many different stances on how violence is needed. And these are really difficult questions. So I just want to, invite that sense of broadness and letting yourself question all that's presented here. I'm going to play the clip and then we'll chit-chat some more.
I'll just say, and I think I'm speaking for a broader community here, we are not happy, but we are not surprised, man. And again, the reason why we go back to Reconstruction and the Civil War is because it is, before the 1960s, the only glimpse at the possibility of a real democracy in this country. And it happened. And in some places, it was actually quite successful. You have people who had been enslaved, who are written off as illiterate fools, who are, serving in legislatures. And actually, with the standard of the time, actually, it's such a hopeful, incredible story. It's a beautiful, beautiful thing. And it was violently destroyed. Once you see that, and once you have that in your heritage, once you, understand that, once you understand that Martin Luther King could be standing up, telling his own people, we do not embrace violence at all. It is morally repugnant. We embrace love. And that could get you shot. Not burn it down. Love can get you shot. You just have a different view of your country. It is not, I emphasize this over and over again, it is not a fatalistic view. It is not, it is written in stone that we will ultimately lose, but you understand that losing is a possibility.
But so then what does there's a Buddhist meditation I like. This is a weird place to go. But it goes like this. I'm of the nature to grow sick. I'm of the nature to grow old. I'm of the nature to lose the people I love. I'm of the nature to die. How then shall I live? And
love that.
Yeah, I do it because sometimes you need the reminder. What I hear you saying in a way is we are of the nature too.
Yeah.
And I think the place I'm trying to push is then, how then shall we live? Because in this distinction you're making between, like, you would have been there correctly yelling at FDR. And I'm not like asking you, but like me, right? Like my work, my role.
Can you answer that? Can you say what I think is a good point. Would you define for me how you see, like, what your role is?
I don't know what my role is anymore. I'll be totally honest with you, man. I feel very conflicted about that question. The role I want to have is a person curiously exploring his political and intellectual interests in political peacetime.
Yeah, the end of that clip always makes me chuckle just a little bit. The way that he frames how he's trying to figure out what his role is as curiously exploring his beliefs in political peacetime. And my immediate thought when I hear that is just peacetime for who? Ezra Klein has been, one of the top people in his field, a public figure for many years, taking on this role as a journalist, as an opinion writer. He has seen and witnessed and had to report on, the real physical and structural violence that we have engaged in for the entirety of his career and before that. He was present during all of the major swaths of violence that have occurred in my lifetime, and all of the police brutality, everything that has gone on with ICE. And so I find it really curious that this man who has had a meditation practice for 15 years, for a decade and a half, with amazing teachers, still isn't connected into the reality of the work that he's doing, and still hasn't connected with his heart to the reality of the suffering of the people that he writes on all the time. And that's surely not an indictment of these practices. I believe in these practices really strongly, but I think what it points to is that we have to make sure that we are showing up with our intention, watching when we become apathetic in our practice, watching the ways that we use our practice to disconnect. Because I think these tools of mindfulness and meditation, it can become practices that empower us, and they can also be practices that can become forms of escapism just as easily. And so watching when that happens in our heart is hugely important for monitoring, what is this practice doing for me? how is this practice transforming the way that I actually show up as a person, the way that I actually show up in the world? And so, yeah, I'm going to take a few minutes to kind of lay out a framework of how engaged Buddhism might look like, might appear, might show up in our worlds, and how we can try to take these nuggets that we find on the mat and bring them out into all of the other moments of our lives, the 99.999% that are not on the mat. But I kind of wanted to give like a minute-ish of just like contemplation here, just to like reflect on, when I am showing up in my various circles, friends, family, community, city, country, world, wherever, where does apathy show up? Where do I feel stuck? Where do I not know how to move? And just allowing those without judgment to arise in our hearts. Awesome, thank you. All right, so before going into the outer worlds, I do want to spend a moment to talk about the inner practice. And I'm going to read this quote from Bell Hooks to get me into this little portion. Fundamentally, the practice of love begins with acceptance. The recognition that wherever we are is the appropriate place to practice, that the present moment is the appropriate time. But for so many of us, our longing to love and be loved has always been about a time to come, a space in the future when it will just happen, when our hungry hearts will finally be fed, when we will find love. Yeah, I think this quote really just like illustrates this. When the perfect time shows up, then I'll move, then I'll break into action, and using our practice as a space to cultivate compassion, to cultivate self-love, the kind of self-love that doesn't have to be obsessed with ourselves, doesn't even have to like ourselves. A love that is unconditional. Another little quote of Bell Hooks is, when love is the ground of our being, a love ethic shapes our participation in politics. And I think that what we do here together, sitting in meditation, is so important for the framework of how we move and how we act in the world. Because oftentimes we have all of these layers of blame and shame and devaluing that we place on ourselves. And without taking the time to remove those layers, it's impossible to not project that outwards. It's impossible to not blame and shame and devalue others. That's part of that interconnectedness that Ty always talks about. And I think Ta-Nehisi Coates as well really held this kind of interconnectedness and impermanence really well. Talking about standing in the presence and the truth of all of the destruction that's occurring, and saying like, yes, I know it could all fall apart. Yes, I know we might not win. Or maybe for a moment we will win, but change is always here. And we have to stay grounded in that love. Ta-Nehisi Coates is just such an amazing example here of being so strong in his own values and being so strong in that place of love for all beings that like really like holds him through. And Ezra Klein says, well, you're being fatalistic. He says, no, that's just the way things are. They always change. But we have to grow this ground within ourselves. And so these practices of loving kindness, compassion practices become so incredibly necessary for us to build the kind of ground within ourselves to continue to move from a place that we can feel proud of, and that builds something that's better than what we have before. And now begin to move a little bit outside of our own personal sphere and looking outwards into how we show up in the world. This is a quote from Kriti Konko from Lion's Roar. Systems of separation, more commonly known as systems of oppression, which is another way of saying systems of domination, hierarchy, or superiority. Based on myths and lies, these systems purport that one group is normal, superior, and or more powerful, and empowered to dominate another set of living beings. For example, patriarchy, class or caste hierarchies, and human domination over animals are all systems of oppression. I think this quote also really exemplifies this idea of the ideologies and the space that we hold inside of our hearts being what emanates outwards. I think about a lot. How many scientists, how many people are researching, climate change, energy, all sorts of fields constantly. Like if you just imagine the amount of hours, the amount of mental, physical labor and energy that we have people exerting constantly, and yet we don't have solutions that are implementable. And I think that's because we have to think about what frameworks and what ideologies are those technologies being created out of. If we have frameworks and ideologies of oppression, then we will continue to create technology and solutions of oppression. Thinking about this interconnectedness, interbeing that Ty so frequently talks about, we understand that these frameworks live inside of us as much as they live outside of us. And doing this inner work to take them apart can be a very effective way in beginning to imagine futures that are bigger or that are just completely different than the ones that we see in front of us. And so now I'm going to play another short little clip from Joanna Macy, who's a wonderful writer. Everybody should go read her work, in my opinion, do whatever you want. She was a student of Ty's for a very long time. A wonderful writer on eco-dharma and philosophy and systems thinking. And she's going to kind of set up perhaps a general framework for thinking about our systems, our world, and how we move through change.
So always when we teach, it's the gift of not trying to give any answers or outcome.
All right. Hold on, everybody.
So always when we teach, it's the gift of not trying to give any answers or outcome, but being held in uncertainty, strengthened by uncertainty, staying in the moment, and seeing that the worldview that was the most useful was to see the three stories, as we call them, being enacted now. There's the story of corporate capitalism, but we decided to call it the Industrial Growth Society. Then right from the beginning, the great unraveling. Get used to it. I like that term so much better than collapse, actually, or because for systems, that's what systems do. They don't just fall over dead. They lose their coherence, their memory, and then the great turning. And always the realization we hold, we don't know which will win out now. It's neck and neck. So the great turning, which is what? It's a transition we're in. We're in it now. It's a transition. We're learning so much in science and in grassroots community building that it's not something we do instead of the collapse. It's something that can guide us through it. So my preposition these days is through. Honey, we're going to have to go through this.
Yeah, and she holds so much wisdom, and there's like such a calmness with when she talks about just like systems completely unraveling from the bottom up, and yeah, I can only imagine that. Yeah, coming from her background of being such an ecological thinker, she can really see and expand out how these human systems that we're existing in are just evolving and composting and being reborn, just like all other ecosystems on Earth. But yeah, there's so much peace there, and she has kind of a framework that she built off of this idea of these 3 different spheres of action that we can take. Yeah, the spheres of the great turning, which that idea of the great turning is what we just listened to and heard about. So yeah, these are her 3 kind of like modes of action that we take. And the first one, holding actions, that's like what we saw when there were all these crowds that gathered to meet the monks in Fort Worth as they arrived back from their journey. It's the civil disobedience, it's the boycotts, it's those kinds of actions that she says are really great at buying us time, but they're not the end-all be-all, and they won't give us the kind of results that we truly want in the end. And so then the next sphere would be structural change, and this sphere kind of embodies this idea that Buckminster Fuller also talks a lot about, where, it's not about burning a system to the ground and then building one up. It's about, creating new structures of love that become so strong that they don't need the old systems, I'm reflecting again on Ta-Nehisi saying, love can get you shot, and thinking about how radical love really is in the face of the current systems that we hold. And even Ty himself was exiled while in the U.S. from both sides in Vietnam for holding a nonviolent stance. And so these values of love and peace, they really are radical, and they really are out of the box, and don't align with a lot of the mainstream systems that we all have to work within. So structural change, that can look like permaculture, it can look like gift economies, it can look like open source technology, but it's basically, building new systems, building resilience, building mutual aid that allows us to build a resilience of love with ourselves and within our own communities. I mean, I even see that, like coming here and participating in this community. That's a way that we practice structural change. showing up for the people around us, showing up to practice together. That's a mode and a method of structural change. And then this shift in consciousness, she says, our structural alternatives cannot take root and survive without deeply ingrained values to sustain them. They must mirror what we want and how we relate to Earth and each other. They require, in other words, a profound shift in our perception of reality. And that shift is happening now, both as cognitive revolution and spiritual awakening. Yeah, and this is the work on the mat that we're all super familiar with, and that we showed up and we just did for like 40 minutes. Yeah, so I'm going to end tonight with a few minutes of like breakout discussion, and we'll have our sheets in front of us to bounce off of. This is part of the social change ecosystem map. And I was kind of wondering if we could like popcorn around, and like if you feel called, you can pass. If you want to read one of the roles and then pop to the next. So Bob, could I have you start and then we'll just go around?
Sure. The first one, weavers. I see through lines of connectivity between people, places, organizations, ideas, and movements.
Experimenters. I innovate, pioneer, and invent. I take risks and course correct as needed.
Frontline responders. I address community crisis by marshaling and organizing resources, networks, and messages.
Visionaries. I imagine and generate our boldest possibilities, hopes and dreams, and remind us of our direction.
Builders. I develop, organize, and implement ideas, practices, people, and resources in service of a collective vision.
Caregivers. I nurture and nourish the people around me by creating and sustaining a community of care, joy, and connection.
Disruptors. I take uncomfortable and risky actions and shake up the status quo to raise awareness and to build power.
Healers. I recognize and tend to the generational and current traumas caused by oppressive systems, institutions, policies, and practices.
Storytellers. I craft and share our community stories, cultures, experiences, histories, and possibilities through art, music, media, and movement.
Guides. I teach, counsel, and advise using my gifts of well-earned discernment and wisdom.
Beautiful. Okay, thank you guys. Yeah, we're gonna take the next 10 minutes, if it's alright, to break out into groups of like 3-ish. And using these offerings in front of you, perhaps considering the roles in which you naturally step into, the ones that feel like they activate you, and perhaps even the ones that you're like, no, wait. I can't get down with that at all. And yeah, anything else that's super alive on your heart, I welcome you into small group sharing. Cool.